Good evening, everybody, and welcome back to your hourly election night updates. My name is Ivana Harinkyu, and I am again joined by our columnist Kyle Whitmire and our guest columnist Cameron Smith here. And we were actually just talking about, we know that the race has been called in Alabama for President Trump, but we're looking at the Senate results and looking right now at our ticker on AL.com, and with 35% of the expected vote in, it looks like Tommy Tuberville's leading about 61% to incumbent Doug Jones's 39%. That's a pretty big margin right there, about 21 points ahead for Tuberville. Kyle, I'll let you go first. This is a pretty big gap. Do we expect this race to be called soon? And do you think that that gap is going to get smaller and a little bit better for Doug Jones? Or do you think that it's just going to continue to widen with Tommy Tuberville leading?
I mean, it could get smaller, but it's not going to close. This is not what the Jones camp was hoping for tonight. They might pick up 100,000 votes when those absentees come in. Some counties put them in first, some counties put them in last, but they're not going to, like, the cavalry's not coming to their rescue tonight. This is a pretty decisive victory for Tuberville. But, I mean, what's remarkable is if you look at the numbers right now, I talked to a Democratic official earlier this week who's saying that, they were really hoping to see the Alabama Democrats break 1 million tonight. That is not out of the realm of possibility for them, and that would be significant considering that I think the 2008 numbers were around 800,000 or so. I mean, they would have hundreds of thousands of more voters, but Republicans just got hundreds and hundreds of thousands of more voters, and GOP turnout tonight is through the roof in Alabama.
Looking at some of our questions, I got Marissa asking about the percentage of precincts. Marissa, so the current count we've got right now for that Senate race is 44% of precincts reporting, which is 35% of the expected vote. And of that, we have Tommy Tuberville at about 61% and incumbent Senator Doug Jones at about 40%. So kind of hovering between a 20 and 21 point lead there with about 44% of precincts reporting, just to answer that question from Marissa. Now, Cam, something I thought was really interesting that both you and Kyle said earlier was that in the polls leading up to today, there was a pretty big margin between Tommy Tuberville and Senator Jones. But both of you said earlier in our videos that you thought that that could be maybe a little bit bigger of a margin than what we saw tonight. Are you still thinking that, or are you thinking this is going to be a bigger blowout?
Yeah, I mean, I still think, I think that Doug Jones knew he was going to lose. I mean, at the end of the day, this was not going to be a close election. And if it stays at 20 points, that's a blowout that I did not anticipate. I mean, I expected reasonably between 10 and 15 points, which is still a big win. But you've got to think, Doug Jones, again, and I'll go back to the judicial nominees. If Doug Jones really wanted to be competitive and try to really compete in Alabama for that Senate seat for a full term, he was going to have to support Trump's nominees because those are big ticket items for a lot of the folks in the state. And the numbers just aren't there for Alabama Democrats. They don't have enough. Kyle pointed this out correctly, that even with a huge turnout from Alabama Democrats, the number of Republicans in the state is just overwhelming. And that's what you're seeing reflected in those numbers. It's not saying Doug Jones is a bad guy or anything like that. They're just a lot more Republicans, and he's not running against Roy Moore.
Well, and we saw something that happened 2 years ago that I think, again, is happening to a lesser degree tonight, which is a lot of people are voting party. I mean, that's pretty clear. I mean, what we saw 2 years ago in our state races is we had a governor's race where you had a candidate who spent millions of dollars, and you had races down ballot where people spent thousands of dollars and got virtually the same result. That all that advertising, all that outreach really wasn't moving the needle except for one party line or another. I think one thing that we're seeing separating the South from perhaps the Midwest tonight, we just don't have a lot of swing voters here. We have people who are attached to their partisan preference, and they're going up and down that line. And I think that Doug Jones will outperform Joe Biden in Alabama tonight, but not by nearly enough.
Quickly looking at some of our questions, Pamela asked, when are absentee ballots getting added to these totals? Pamela, that's kind of a $1 million question here. It seems like everybody kind of does it a little bit differently. In Alabama, the polling places, they could not open those ballots. They could not be counted until kind of midday today. So I think Kyle mentioned earlier, some precincts are going to run those ballots through those machines first. Some are going to run them through later on in the night. So we're not really sure about that. There's no easy answer to that question, I should say, Pamela. So we're still waiting on some of those. We do expect that some of those are going to come in a little bit later. So we're going to keep an eye out for those and see if I can get you any other percentages on that. Now, Cam, you said something interesting about you think that a lot of voters were turned off by Doug Jones after he did not vote for two of President Trump's Supreme Court nominees, that being Justice Kavanaugh and now Justice Amy Coney Barrett. Do you think that, let's put those votes aside, let's just pretend for a second that they're not a factor. Do you think this would have been a more competitive race between Doug Jones and Tommy Tuberville?
No. I mean, it might have been marginally so, maybe a couple points, if that, but Kyle's right. Particularly in the what I'll call the red South, the numbers of Republican voters are there. They're voting straight ticket, and when Trump's on the ballot, this is a binary choice. And so it's Trump's there. I've got to have a really overwhelming reason to deviate and say I'm going to pick a Democrat over somebody down ticket. That just doesn't happen a lot, and so. Even if Doug Jones had said, hey, I want to be as competitive as I possibly can in Alabama, might have picked up a couple extra points, but I don't think the outcome was ever in question. We have a lot of people that had said before, I voted for Doug in 2017. And something I think you mentioned earlier, Cam, was that was when that was a special election. We know that Doug Jones was running against Roy Moore at the time. And I think that, there were a lot of people who made that decision and voted for a Democrat for probably the first time in a long time. Kyle, do we know when the last time Alabama put a Democrat in a nationwide seat was?
Hal Heflin, maybe? Is that right?
Yeah, it's before Sessions. Yeah.
Yeah. So that would have been, let's see, I'm doing the math, 1990, I believe. I was in college when Sessions won. So yeah, that would have been 1990. I can't remember when Richard Shelby switched parties. That might be the difference there, but.
So it's fair to say it's been a long time.
It's been long enough that I can't remember.
But Ivana, I want to jump on something Kyle said earlier that is one of those interesting times where I agree with Kyle, which, is a rarity. The idea that we don't proportionally award electoral college votes in a majority of the states is a huge problem. The idea that, for example, if you're a Republican in Orange County in California, it doesn't matter. Those California votes are going to go to the Democrat nominee, and the same thing in Alabama, right? I think the right answer is not national popular vote type stuff where whoever wins the national popular vote gets that state's electoral college. The right answer to all of this is just states should say, we're going to proportionally award our electoral college votes based on the popular vote. That is the easiest way to solve this. And then guess what? What happens in a minority situation in California matters. What happens in Alabama matters. I think it makes for a better election and a better election integrity. And I think that's the kind of thing we ought to be talking about right now, because, when we're playing winner take all in heavily populated states, it's just not a good deal.
And you talk about that, and it is it's very rare. And I'm glad that I get to see the two of y'all with some very different opinions on things, agree on something. We can all celebrate that one tonight. But what do we do to get that? Is that something that is that a decision that can be made at the state level? Is that something that has to come from our senators and our state and our U.S. representatives? How do we get to a point where we could make that change in Alabama about the Electoral College?
I think the states can decide it, right, Cam? But
Absolutely.
it's not something that the incentives are really there for anybody to do, because, I mean, the reason we have winner all take states is that it gives the parties more incentive. Well, on one end of the spectrum, sort of the Alabama end of the spectrum, you can sort of, breathe easy in a place like Alabama if you're Republicans, and it allows them to focus on battleground states and very narrow narrow geographic area. And I think it works maybe for parties. I think it maybe works for the people in charge. I'm not the people who are in power. I'm not sure that it really works for voters. I do think that Donald Trump looks like he's going to pick up some states tonight that he was not projected to win in the polls. If again we have the scenario of a majority of the people in this country voting for one candidate and the Electoral College voting for another, I'm afraid of what we're going to see in the next few weeks.
Let me stop both of you for just 1 second. It looks like we might have a call in the Senate race. Let me get that checked out. And while I'm checking that out, and Kim, I might have to interrupt you in a second while I'm checking on this. But let me ask you, Kim, do you think that it was a turnoff for voters that were maybe planning to vote for Tommy Tuberville, that he didn't want to debate Senator Jones, and that he didn't even want to debate in the primaries, and that he didn't make a lot of media appearances, forums, things like that? Do you think that was something that voters really took into account, or do you think voters just thought, I'm voting straight ticket Republican?
I think that they basically said, I'm going to vote for the Republican. But look, I'm a policy nerd. I like to hear what people actually think and how they'd lead and how they'd be different. That's something I care about as a voter. I want everybody to debate. The one thing that I'd actually like to see is the parties force the debates on the primary level, saying, hey, if you reach a certain threshold or you're a candidate for Senate at the primary level, you must have at least one public debate where you participate. Because the truth is, once Tommy Tuberville won the primary in a convincing fashion, he didn't need to debate Doug Jones. He said, I'm going to win.
So going to stop you right there. We do have a result in this race. The Associated Press has called the U.S. Senate seat for Republican Tommy Tuberville, saying he wins the election, defeats incumbent U.S. Senator Doug Jones. So we do have that result now that we can share. AP just called it about a minute ago. So I'm going to look at these not final, but the latest numbers we have. It looks like this race was called with just 41% of the expected vote in. That's 52% of the precincts reporting, with 61% for Tuberville and 38% for Jones. I'm not good at math, but that's an over 20-point lead from my understanding. And again, I'm very bad at math. But
no, you got it right.
Okay, that's over 20 points, and that's a pretty big lead here. And again, kind of, Cam, like we were just talking about, that is something that's a big lead, and especially a big lead for a candidate and now a presumptive winner of a U.S. Senate seat that didn't debate primary opponents and didn't debate a general election opponent.
Yeah, and I think this is evidence that this is a team sport. I mean, and let's be honest, you have a Republican football coach in Alabama running against the Democrat. And that's just a tough combination right out the gate. But this is what we've kind of reduced ourselves to. And it goes back to the issue of the Electoral College. Alabama doesn't matter. And what I mean by that is it's reliably Republican. So Joe Biden, he might show up and wave for like 5 seconds, but he's saying, I lose that from a presidential standpoint, so I don't really have to pay attention. And I understand there's a lot of rhetoric, but at the end of the day, when we do the Electoral College the way we do, it really disadvantages small states because either they're blue or red, and that's about it. And then they don't get a lot of attention beyond that.
Well, and we know that, I'm just looking through some of our reporting here, that 66-year-old former Auburn football coach coached at Auburn from 1999 to through 2008, and he's the winner here, and he has cast himself as this outsider, this drain the swamp candidate, and has really aligned himself with President Trump from day one. That's kind of been his stance on everything here. And I do want to quickly note something we mentioned earlier. I do have confirmation that Doug Jones was the first Democrat to win a Senate race in Alabama, a national Senate race, since 1992. So just throw out that 92 date here. But, this is a early-ish time to call an election and to call this race. It's just after 9. Polls just closed 2 hours ago. Kyle, are you surprised at all that this race was called in 2 hours?
No, I mean, this is about the time of night that we see these things called. I mean, what we're going to see nationally is very different from Alabama because we don't have a lot of mail-in ballots. We don't have a lot of outstanding votes that are going to have to be counted. This is about the time of night during election season, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock hour when we see these races called.
I'm looking at, again, some of our reporting, and we know that President Trump spoke on the phone with Tommy Tuberville earlier today. We'll note that Tuberville said that the president sounded very hoarse and said that he could barely talk on the phone. No reason or no explanation given for that comment. But Tuberville made an appearance at the Renaissance Hotel in Montgomery, where his supporters are gathering at about 6 p.m. We are expecting him to come out in a little bit and make a speech. We will bring all of that to you. But something that I think is interesting is Tommy Tuberville said, quote, "My whole game plan for the entire almost 2 years I've been running is to go directly to the people and tell them, number one, why I'm doing this, and number two, why I'm qualified." Cam, do you think that the majority of voters, the majority of Alabamians believe that Tuberville is qualified to hold this seat?
I don't think they care. I think that he's a Republican and he's going to, align with them in ways that Doug Jones doesn't. I mean, that's just the truth. And so for Tommy Tuberville to say, hey, I made this compelling case based on my qualifications and policy. No, he didn't. He basically said, I'm with Trump. I want to run with Trump, and tied himself to Trump. And it's going to be a little bit interesting when he's in the United States Senate. If President Trump isn't successful, Tuberville's going to have to say, hey, here's why I'm here. Here's why what I want to do, how I want to lead, how I want to be different. And if he doesn't do that, I mean, he could be, in 6 years, a primaried Senate candidate. And that could be really interesting.
Well, the other thing I would be worrisome about if I were Alabamians tonight is this is someone that we know has been pulled into at least 2 Ponzi schemes. And what's going to happen the first time this man meets a lobbyist? There are going to be a lot of people in Washington, D.C. competing for his attention. And, it's going to be interesting to see if he has the discernment to be able to understand who his friend is and who are the people who are just there trying to be his friend because they need something out of him. I know that the rhetoric of being a Washington outsider and draining the swamp and that sort of thing is very appealing to voters. But there's also value in having someone in Washington who's been there for a long time, whether that's Doug Jones, not that long, or someone like Richard Shelby, who Alabama is probably going to lose in 2 years. It's going to be very interesting to see not just who wins tonight, we know that, but probably more important is going to be where Alabama fits into the political landscape as we see these election results play out nationally.
And I think one of the things Tommy Tuberville is going to find out very quickly is that the members of the United States Senate are not nearly as impressed that he was a former football coach. And so he's going to have to say, here's why I'm here. Here's what I want to do. And to be clear, he's going to be a reliable Republican vote in ways Doug Jones was not. That's what the people of Alabama wanted, and that's what they're going to get. The better question is, okay, now that he's won, will he lead? Will he step up? Or will he just be that stock Republican vote that occupies the Senate seat?
Well, we do have a new senator-elect, I should say, in Alabama, Senator-elect Tommy Tuberville. We're expecting him to take the stage here in just a few minutes. And I'm going to go check in with our reporters at the Tommy Tuberville camp and at the Doug Jones camp and see how the mood is at both locations. So, gentlemen, again, thanks so much for coming back, giving us a little analysis on this, and getting this news while we're live, too. That's one thing that I know we all enjoy about election night is the unpredictability.
Thank you.
Thank y'all so much, everybody. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned. We'll be back here at 10 with some more updates for you, and we'll see you in an hour.